Let's talk about Justin Jefferson, LSU.
Yeah.
My goodness. All right. Number one word. I think we've both got a similar vibe on the guy, but yours?
My word was reliable. He was the slant guy. I mean, how many times did LSU run slant patterns this year where Jefferson was catching it and dragging a guy for an extra, 7 or 8 yards? It was, 3rd and 6. I'm shocked people didn't sit on those slants, but that's a testament to Jefferson. They oftentimes knew it was coming, and, he worked those two-way goes really well. He carved off his routes beautifully. He's got a good length to him. But more than anything, it was just the fact that when a pass was anywhere close to him and they absolutely needed it, he caught the ball. And that was just exciting for me to watch. I mean, reliability is an exciting trait for NFL people. Yeah. They want people they can count on. And to me, that's Justin Jefferson. I think he's going to be a really solid pro in a lot of different ways.
So I was thinking about productivity, reliability, but also I got to maneuverability because to me, I don't know, like this is a little window into the process I get when you're watching tape. Sometimes I look at a player and I'm like, oh, this reminds me of this. So watching Justin Jefferson reminded me of my senior year of college where my roommate had like a Firebird convertible, and I had like an old Jeep Wrangler that like was stick shift, straight 4 engine,
right.
But her Firebird was also stick shift, so I'd have to like move it out of the driveway all the time. And I was the only other, like we lived in a house with a couple of other people, but we were the only two who knew how to drive sticks, so we were the only two allowed to move the cars. And I remember going from my crappy like 95 Wrangler with no air conditioning or heating, no power, anything. And then like moving my car, my tin can to the curb and then getting in her Firebird and like, ooh, the touch was just so gentle and it moved so quick. And when I was watching Justin Jefferson, I was like, wow, we talk about quarterbacks having touch, but this is a receiver with touch. This is a receiver who like very gently can adjust and not in a dynamic, explosive, big way like CeeDee Lamb or an uber obviously physical way like Mims, but just a tiny little maneuver that makes all the difference in the world and makes him very reliable. So I don't know if that makes sense, but there's just it's not even precision. It's just a tiny little pitter pat to his game that's nuanced, I guess.
Yeah. And when you have that car in your life,
I mean, I still don't, but whatever.
Well, yeah, but it gives you that sense of calmness, right? That's what you need. Every quarterback could use a Justin Jefferson for exactly the reason that you had your, what was you say, a 95 Wrangler? I had an 87 Mercury Cougar. It didn't treat me quite the same, but I get where you're going with this for sure. Yes.
My Wrangler was like the tough and rumble Debo Samuel that like grumbled a bunch, but it kind of matched me. And my roommate was this like tall brunette, like skinny brunette, and she just had this convertible. And every time I rode it, I was like, well, this is different living,
But your roommate was Jamar Chase. Right. We're going to take that comp another step.
Well, now it's going all over the place. But like, so there is just a like a touch to his game, a maneuverability that I think is why is part of the reason, at least, as to why he's so reliable and productive.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
So the stat.
I've got a very interesting stat that maybe explains how he was used in college and how I think he'll be used in the NFL, which is that 109 out of 111 of his catches this year came from the slot. And you may not think of him in that sort of, Julian Edelman slot receiver mold, but we've seen in the NFL, and I know you're obviously aware of these guys, the bigger slots sort of, he's not a massive receiver or anything like that, but he's a little longer than your typical slot receiver. And it's a thing now. And more teams are using this where they can, as long as they've got that little quickness to kind of carve off their routes and make sharp cuts and things like that, you give yourself a big target over the middle of the field, you may not need a tight end. You may have other designs offensively you can use. So to me, him winning on the outside, I don't love him as a receiver. He'd probably be a third-round pick if he was simply an outside receiver. But the fact that he really honed his craft in the slot last year, it gives him a benefit, but it also kind of clearly defines his role. To me, he's, I'd rather see him working 80% of the time inside and maybe 20 or less outside.
I 100% agree with you. When you talked about honing his craft, that leads into the stat that I like the most about him. He didn't catch a single ball in his first year as a Tiger, 2017.
That's right.
2 years later, led the nation with 111 grabs and the second most receiving scores with 18, just behind, by the way, his teammate Jamar Chase, who had 20.
Chase. We'll be talking about Jamar next year at this time, by the way. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Comp him.
He's Cooper Kupp. He's that guy who has that precision to his game. He's got a great feel for football. He understands the soft spots and zones. Now, he's faster than Cooper Kupp. May not be quite as big as Cooper, but when you watch him kind of manipulate defenders and find those creases and things like that, that's a lot of what Jefferson did last year. Now, Cooper Kupp, might be a little more refined and advanced at this stage, but that's kind of the role that I could see him playing in the NFL. And think about what Kupp did to the Rams offense. Obviously McVay gets a lot of credit and everything else, but he was a crucial part that first year when they first broke out. So I could see Jefferson having somewhat of a similar effect to wherever he lands.
Well, working as a security blanket is absolutely essential, especially if you have a younger quarterback. And let's be honest, this is a league in which the old guard at signal caller is changing over. So there's a likelihood that he'll be with a young-ish quarterback.
Good point.
And I also feel like I feel like the technique and precision with which he played at LSU is overshadowed often not just by Jamar Chase's incredible athleticism and his 20 touchdowns, but also the fact that Joe Burrow is a wildly accurate passer. And so it's a little bit of that Drew Brees, Michael Thomas conversation, right? Like, is an aging Drew Brees accurate because he has the most efficient receiver in the league? Or is Michael Thomas the most efficient receiver in the league because he has an uber accurate Drew Brees throwing him the ball? And so it'll be interesting to see, regardless of where Jefferson lands, which one of those things, chicken or the egg, kind of came first. I comped him to, at his ceiling, Keenan Allen. At his floor, Tyler Boyd.
Both good players, too. I mean, if he lands somewhere between Boyd and Allen, Boyd, it took him a couple years to get going. Once he did, he became a pretty reliable player for the Bengals. I mean, that makes a pretty, that's a safe pick right there. And Keenan Allen, you see players all the time on Twitter saying, who's the best route runner? Keenan Allen. Who's the most underrated receiver? Keenan Allen. He gets it all the time. I love it. I think it's great.
But the difference is to me, the difference is Keenan Allen, and he talked about this actually in reference last summer to Juju Smith-Schuster having to be promoted from wide receiver 2 to the number 1 on the squad. Keenan Allen was able to successfully transition as not just a slot player, but the number 1. Tyler Boyd, we saw last year without AJ Green, not nearly as productive. His job is to be a number 2. Juju Smith-Schuster's job is to be a number 2. The quarterback situation in Pittsburgh obviously didn't help things last season, but I think that Jefferson is a high floor player who projects to be a solid number 2. If he can continue to evolve, then maybe he hits Keenan Allen's status, but that again is ceiling status.
Yep. And so that reliability seems to fit pretty well with your team fit too. I mean, I think that would be, we were talking earlier about the doghouses. I like your pick for a team fit.
Well, when you talk about Aaron Rodgers wanting a reliable receiver who can absolutely catch the ball, Green Bay makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Also, some scouts have comped Jefferson to Davante Adams. Now, I don't see Jefferson's play strength at the same level as Davante Adams. I don't think he's as physical a player. Yep. But it would make sense if there is enough overlap in those two skill sets that you might want to do a next-gen situation with Davante Adams now in his late 20s.
Sure.
And that mentorship, if you're looking to the future, especially because you have an aging quarterback too. So I think Green Bay makes a lot of sense for Jefferson.
I picked Philly. I think the Eagles need a reliable receiver. They were plagued by drop passes. They had injuries at the position. Jefferson played like 1,000 snaps last year or something, never came off the field. He's sort of got that sort of, he's the guy at the gym who can, win on the basketball court and play like 12 straight games and never break out a sweat. He's that kind of an athlete. So I love his durability. I love the fact that he doesn't drop passes very often. And, you stick him between, you put in a Miles Sanders offense and get that playmaking ability. You see if J.J. Arcega-Whiteside can develop into a home run guy. There's some interesting potential. The 2 tight ends there. Yeah, I get it. Right, we haven't seen much yet. But, that offense takes on a different dimension if you all of a sudden add somebody who's just chugging along, making those key short conversions.
I like it a lot I don't know how Alshon Jeffrey stays, but
right, he's probably gone,
right, or if Deshaun Jackson can stay healthy. My only worry is that Jefferson won't be able, that he is, especially right now at the early stages of his pro career, able to be the number one. I think he was able to do what he did because he had Jamar Chase on the other side of the field, working the outside and taking away defensive coverage. So I think it makes a lot of sense for him to land in Philly. I just don't think he'd be best served, or the fantasy community would be best served if he did land there.
True. The only thing I thought was that, I guess with Zach Ertz getting 130 targets, there wouldn't be that necessity of okay, we've got to force the ball in here or put too much on his plate.
That's an excellent point.
But no, you're right though. Obviously, as a wide receiver running wide receiver routes, there also is that question of can you use a 2 tight end offense with a slot guy like Jefferson? So it raises a good point. I don't know. It may not be a perfect fit, but I know they need some sort of reliability.
So are you doing any more mocks? What do you have next in your constantly churning draft coverage content?
Yeah, what are we, about 24 days from the draft? I think I have 28 mocks left. No, I'm kidding. I've got scouting reports about that many. I've got more than that, actually. So I'll be cranking those out at about 7 or 8 or 9 a week, and probably at least one more. Probably one more and then one more. So 2 more? Yeah, 2.
Okay.
1 plus 1. Is that how it adds? Yeah.
Well, Eric and I will be back for another rookie snapshot next week, and we're going to talk about running backs. In the meantime, check the website for Eric's player write-ups, and I have a fantasy snapshot series of the 5 wide receivers we just discussed in more detail heading out in print starting next week. So check that out. And in the meantime, obviously, Matt Harmon and I will be back with our regularly scheduled Yahoo Fantasy Football Podcast later in the week. And you should follow us on Twitter at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm at Liz Loza _FF, and that is at Eric with a C _Edholm.